Very important because that was published in the paper just before the CBD COP, and that had a huge influence on some of the decisions taken at that meeting as well. And likewise the red assemblies, which also fed into that whole process. It's really important that your product can be repeated over time and you can have this monitoring aspect to the data. I mentioned about it informing and guiding conservation policy and action on the ground. We assume that it does all these things, but we don't really know for sure. And it's really exciting to see that in the next 4 years with a new plan, new program for IUCN, so we're going to try and figure out how we better monitor some of these aspects, to actually see how the red list is used and taken up, so then monitor that process around the world. So really see, does the red list, listening on the red list, actually lead to some positive action on the ground? And key part of the product is the branding. Having a really strong and distinctive brand is really key to communicating the whole product and its value around the world. I think you need to touch on the attributes now, Jane, or say the attributes for later?
You say that because
okay.
Here it has to go.
Yeah.
So, thanks very much, Craig. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Piero Genovese, who's chair of the Invasive Species Specialist Group. Akbar, can you make sure the right presentation is coming up? Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry that I have to rush away. I have another event on the interlinking between the red list and the global invasive species database at 3:30. So I'm part of it. So more or less the same slide. Okay, I'll try to give you an overview of the database we run and of the ongoing work for interlinking it with the red list. Shama is going to stay for the rest of the session, so she can respond to the question. First of all, the Global Invasive Species Database is quite old. The first prototype was before year 2000. It is free, it is online, it is searchable. It is with a focus on species affecting biodiversity and ecosystems. There are others working more on agriculture and other areas. It is now undergoing a major restructure that is almost completed. The product is done mostly on a voluntary basis. Nevertheless, we managed to, in this period, to gather quite good support from members and institutions. So, for example, we managed to have it translated in Chinese. It is fully translated in Chinese and partly in French. We have information contributed by many experts and practitioners voluntarily. All the content is peer-reviewed by species experts. We have a special focus also on management information because it is very much focused on enhancing action on the field to mitigate the impact on invasive species. And it's also the repository of several projects we are involved in. The traffic reports are really very good, so we have a very good user input. In general, this is also because the product is also meant for practitioners, so there are many people around the world that use it every day for managing invasive species. We have species profiles, about 850. The information are at the location level in some cases, some others are general. For some species we have information related to many locations, for some others we have information only on a few locations. The impact, we have information on impact for over 500 species with detailed description of the impact for over 1,000 locations. We have information on pathway. This is one of the areas where the CBD is given priority for work, and we have data, as I said, on management at the species level, as well as many data at the specific site level. And we have, of course, information on other species affecting red-listed species. So the restructure that we are doing right now is aimed at making the GSD a tool for decision making, and also through increasing the interoperability with other information sources, especially these, but also others. So we want to explore the possibility also to interlink with the WTPA and other global tools and increase the search functionalities of the system. And as I say, the main aims are reflect the strategic plan of the CBD, so prioritizing species for response and prioritizing pathways for prevention. We are working in strict contact with the CBD. Jane signed a memorandum of cooperation on this specific issue, and the CBD launched a partnership among data providers. There is a kiosk up next COP11 where the partnership will be relaunched somehow, and in that location we will present some prototype products for working at this global level, like a list of lists for facilitating access to other products and the preliminary assessment of pathways. The work that we are doing with Red List to interlink the two products, I just wanted to show you some of the principles and some of the products, the outcomes that this work can produce. So first of all, the Red List of course has many information that are very valuable to us. Think just one example, the American mink is also invasive in a large part of the world, so we can access many information in the Red List that are important also for people working on the species where it is invasive. And we have links in our database to the Red List, so the system is already almost interlinked in the sense that you can go from one database to the other through these links, so whatever impact we record on the Red List species, there is a direct link to the Red List. In the last 1.5 years, we have explored the Red List, and we have developed a tool that will provide more information to be linked between the two systems. So in the Red List, invasives, when a species is affected by invasives, it is coded as 8.1, so you will see this code in several points. And we searched for cases where these were not, where species were not coded as 8.1, but there were information on impact by invasive species. And we also searched for other information that were included in the narrative of the Red List, but not in the codes. So we found several species that were not coded as threatened by invasives, but are affected by invasives. Some of them are just affected, for example, by livestock, so it's just a matter of definition that you use. And as you can see, one of the elements is that we can provide a more accurate estimate of the overall impact on invasive species on threatened species. This is one of the key products that I think it's important for stressing the importance of assessing this threat. This graph partly reflects the proportion of species that are affected by invasives in the different groups. If you see on the first group, the corals, this is the old assessment, so we used the last year assessment. This reflects just a level of information in the assessment that is very very broad, very large scale, so the same assessment is repeated for most species, and that's why the number is, the proportion is so high. As I say, that we can, with this information, we can easily produce a proportion of species affected by invasive species by group, in plants and animals, of course. We can assess the impact of invasive species by the level of threat in the Red List and by taxonomic group. We can also assess, because we classified each case also through the mechanism of impact, so we can identify what are the key mechanisms by which invasive species affect threatened species. As you can see, predation is a key one, but also grazing, browsing and trampling are very important. We also used, we developed a simple category of impact level. We used a system that was already established for birds, and we reclassified all the impact by using the narrative in the Red List. And this can also help us understanding in which groups, in which areas the impact is particularly severe. And we can identify the most invasive species. Of course, this is global, but we can do it for every single group. As you can see, domestic cat ranks first. The kitted fungus, even if it only affects amphibians, is very high, and you see the others. As you can see, many are domestic species, so this is an area where we want to work more in the future. So it is possible to use this interlink for prioritizing invasive species, that is one of the aims of the CBD. If you look at the information that we can provide at the single species level, so the red list, let's take the example of the red fox. You see it is quite high in this global rank. We can provide a list of species impacted by the red fox, where it is invasive. And the added value of an interoperable system is that practitioners working on this issue can also see not only the list of species that are affected, but also can access the information we have on the management options that are available for controlling the fox. We have a list of experiences for managing the fox in different contexts of the world. We have a list of contacts and an expert that can be contacted for gathering more information on how to deal with the problem. Going to the geographic data of the system, we don't have a GIS layer for each species, but we have a list of countries and of islands. So we can develop a simple mapping system at the island level or at the country level. But nevertheless, we think this is going to be particularly important for different reasons. One is that this can help us developing indicators. We already provided information for the indicators used for GBO3. But also there are areas, think for example, this is the map again of the American mink, and you see the native range reported in the red list, and you see the observation used by other organisms like GBIF. As you can see, without even a rough map of where the species is present, because introduced, it may be misleading to see the observation data that are displayed at the moment. So we believe that the mapping tool is a crucial element of the system, even if it's going to be very simple compared to what the red list can provide. So next steps, we need to complete the redesign of GSD that has been totally restructured and re-engineered. The same information will be populated in the new system. The system will have a totally new web interface. We want to use as much as possible the graphic of the red list, so to show that we are in the same kind of family. We need to complete the interlink between GSD and the red list, and continue cooperation with other information services working on invasive species globally. We need to improve the mapping tools that we have, and also explore interoperability with other key products like WTPA and other protected areas system in the world. And the other point is that we need to find ways to strengthen cooperation with specialist groups doing the assessments for the red list, because in many cases we find information, we have access to information that they don't have, and we can help them, for example, identify the specific invasive species that is affecting. In many cases we find species threatened by invasive fish or weeds. We have information for providing a more precise description of the threat, and that can add value to both systems. Thank you. I'm sorry if I have to escape of the presentation. This is just a few questions, of course.
Thanks, Piero. Perhaps we could just take a few questions quickly. Have you got? Oh no, Shama can ask them anyway.
No, I don't know. Anything very good.
Any burning questions? Jim, just one burning question then.
Yeah, just you mentioned interoperability with WTPA. Do you have a feeling for what that would look like if you were to achieve it? What would it look like to have interoperability with WTPA?
We have lists of species for some protected areas. At the moment, for example, for Europe, we did a web survey asking all protected area managers to provide us with a list of top invasives using the WTPA ID code. So we are going to provide lists of invasive species by protected area, and we are cooperating with the WCDA to work on this issue. So we think that even globally this can be easily accessible. So simple information, list of invasives by protected area in one area. And the other one, we have information on management at the protected area level. So this kind of information could easily be provided to WCDA in the future.
Thank you. Shama, would you like to add to that?
Also, on the global invasive species database, we have a location type as a protected area is a location type. So, for example, you can search at Kruger and come up with all the list of invasive species in Kruger, and all the species they affect in impacts and how it's being managed.
So thanks for that question too, because I think it kind of does lead to a little bit of an action point, which is to understand a little bit more precisely what you've got in mind in relation to the linkage with the WDPA, who's involved, timescales, what budgets are needed, and I think we can get it a little bit more concrete.
It's totally to be explored.
Totally explored, but you can probably, I mean, it doesn't sound like it would be that hard. Not what I kind of feel instinctively about this. So it might be a logical sort of step we could take.
So if in the next stage we have any chance to discuss it with the key people in
that would be great while they're all here.
Yeah, it would be great. Very helpful for us. We can show you the work we are doing in Europe and the data we have and see if there is any chance to start a collaboration.
I mean, maybe, Trevor, I don't know if you'd already met, but we can make this happen, Trevor, right?
We're on the same email chain.
Okay. This is really, really encouraging,
We
actually.
managed to chat in the next days.
And if the people know each other, these things always go so much better, don't they? So many thanks. Good luck with your next session at Species Pavilion. That's great. Let's take a few more questions on the invasive species database, if there are any. Ed?
Just one small question. Early on there.
Can you just do the microphone things, please?
Switch up the volume.
Here comes the backup microphone.
Two microphones, I just make sure I'm there. Just a small thing. Just early on there, there seemed to be a focus on invasives in conserved areas, protected areas. It didn't seem to have much focus on agricultural lands. I may have been mistaken, but I know it's a huge issue in agricultural lands, in grasslands and so forth. So I wasn't sure if I was missing what was there or. Maybe I shall.
The focus of the GIC is species with impact on biodiversity and natural areas. But we do have on grasslands, for example, bromus, invasive grasses, but we don't go into agriculture, weeds, pests of agriculture, of managed ecosystem though. But there are a few which kind of overlap between both, and we have them.
It's a really important issue, so perhaps it's something to think about for the future, because apparently it has some serious development consequences. I mean, people's whole crops failing because of some nasty thing that's got in. So it's something we could think about in future.
Yes.
But can I follow that up with another general question? I can't help feeling that the number of invasive species that are truly out there is not reflected on the database.
No, not at all. If you look at the archives of the ISST, which we built over 12 years, there are at least 3,000 folders on different 3,000 species. But all we have are about 850. It's just a lack of funding to prepare these profiles, because to create a good one, it takes about 8 days to do it, and it's a lot of work. So we've kind of shortcut it into producing interim profiles, which are quite brief, but even that takes a little time. So now we want the next step ahead to at least include inventories of species in different countries and with distributed records of known invasive species. So it's like a early warning kind of step.
So given the huge nature of the task you have to deal with, there's something there we should think about in relation to, which bits are easiest and cheapest to do first. And if we integrated it with the other products a bit more, maybe we could use that to sell the whole thing to donors. So anyway, that's a follow-up point. But Stephen, you had your hand up earlier.
Same question.
Okay. Any again? Yeah.
Sorry, just one more point to follow up. This species database talks mainly to biodiversity and conservation. Yes, I know many international organizations, and even the CGIART, the Consultative Group on International Agriculture, are, I think, still busy promoting certain invasive species. I know Prosopis was promoted many years ago. Lucina, there's a whole range of them. Are we interacting with those sorts of groups?
We do.
It's a long struggle, this whole agenda, and it's not seen as a very popular agenda. It's very hard to make a case for invasive species. It's out of fashion at the moment, as well as Shama and I are working hard. Wherever we go, the CBD get it though, and that's why Target 9 is so important. Which, by the way, the Invasive Species Specialist Group had a huge amount to do with influencing that. Any other points? And then we may go back to the red list for a few points and then we'll move on. Stephen?
There's no answer to this question, but it's worth asking. The definition of what is an invasive species is pretty boggy, and we'll get more boggy with climate change. Are you thinking about how to deal with that on an intellectual basis?
At the moment, we are sticking to the IUCN definition, and I think people have to understand that the Global Invasive Species Database, we don't actually interpret or have our own interpretation of the biostatus of the species. For example, if we use another database or scientific literature, we actually reflect what is given in that piece of literature on the database. So we don't interpret it, because in many cases, if it's just an introduced species, some people tend to classify them as invasive, even with no evidence of impact or spread or anything like that. But we do call it alien, and we say it's not specified, the invasiveness, when we have a doubt. So this is a very tricky thing about the terminology. Now we're sticking to species which have impact on biodiversity and natural ecosystems, and where there's evidence of impact.
This relates to knowledge.